There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with certainty or spectacle. They don't ask to be remembered. They simply exist quietly enough that you almost overlook them until one day you realize they have been reshaping you for longer than you've been paying attention. Most changes happen that way, not through sudden revelations, not through dramatic conversations, but through small shifts in perception that accumulate until the person looking at the world is no longer the same one who first opened their eyes. I've always trusted distance, not because I feared closeness, but because distance preserved accuracy. From far enough away, everything remained clear. Expectations couldn't distort what they couldn't reach. Assumptions stayed at the surface. People rarely questioned what they believed they already understood, and I learned early that allowing them to believe they understood was often easier than correcting them. It created peace, or at least something that looked enough like peace to become familiar. The strange thing about familiar places is that you stop asking whether they still belong to you. You continue living inside them simply because they've existed for so long that leaving would require explaining why you stayed in the first place. I became comfortable inside silence, not the uncomfortable silence that grows between strangers searching for something to say, but a different kind. A silence built from observation rather than absence. The kind that notices details no conversation ever reaches. People often mistake quietness for emptiness. It isn't. Silence has always been crowded. Crowded with patterns, with unfinished thoughts, with questions that don't need immediate answers, with truths that become weaker the moment they're forced into language. I've spent years watching people speak long before they understand what they're trying to say. They rush toward explanations because uncertainty frightens them. Every pause feels like failure. Every unanswered question becomes something they need to conquer. I never felt that urgency. Some things deserve time. Some things become clearer only after they've existed without interruption. The world, however, rarely rewards patience. It rewards speed, immediate reactions, instant certainty. Confident opinions, formed before genuine understanding, has the opportunity to appear. Maybe that's why I've always felt slightly misplaced, not disconnected, not isolated, just operating according to a rhythm that doesn't seem to match the one everyone else follows. I stopped trying to explain that years ago. Explanations are strange things. The more carefully you explain yourself, the more people begin replacing your meaning with their own interpretation. Eventually, they stop hearing what you intended and start responding to the version they've constructed. After watching that happen enough times, you begin choosing precision over exposure. You reveal less, not because you're hiding, because you're preserving something. There's a difference. Most people never notice it, and perhaps they're not meant to. Not everything hidden is secret. Some things remain unseen simply because they lose their shape when exposed too early. I've accepted that for a long time, or at least I believed I had. Then something changed. Not all at once. There wasn't a single conversation I could point toward. No unforgettable moment where everything suddenly became different. If someone asked me when it started, I wouldn't have an answer. I'd only know that somewhere between ordinary moments, the ordinary quietly disappeared. It happened gradually enough to escape attention, until it didn't. I started noticing that certain thoughts no longer felt entirely my own. Not because someone had influenced them. Influence leaves fingerprints. This left recognition. as though ideas I'd spent years carrying alone suddenly existed somewhere outside of me, without losing their original shape. That realization stayed with me longer than I expected, not because it was emotional, because it was precise. Possession is difficult to ignore. Emotion can exaggerate, marry can distort. Expectation can invent things that never truly existed. But precision has a way of remaining unchanged no matter how many times you examine it. So I examined it again and again, every time expecting to discover that I'd misunderstood something, every time finding the same quiet consistency waiting where I'd left it. Consistency changes people, not because it's loud, because it's impossible to dismiss forever. Eventually, the mind stops asking whether something exists and begins asking what its existence means. That question followed me everywhere, not obsessively, batteringly, like a shadow that wasn't trying to catch me because it already knew we were walking in the same direction. I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously ignored, the spaces between conversations, the moments before someone answered, the expressions people wore when they believed no one was watching. Those brief, unguarded fragments often revealed more than hours of dialogue ever could. It's remarkable how much truth lives in moments people consider insignificant. A delayed breath, a hesitation lasting less than a second, eyes focusing somewhere that doesn't physically exist because the real conversation has moved inward. We reveal ourselves constantly. Most people simply don't know where to look. I suppose I've always looked there, not intentionally, just naturally. Maybe that's why certainty has never impressed me. Certainty often arrives before understanding. Understanding usually arrives quietly, carrying enough humility to admit that it still has more to learn. That's the kind I've always trusted, the slower kind, the kind willing to remain unfinished. Lately, though, something has unsettled that balance. Not because it contradicts what I believe, because it confirms too much of it. Confirmation is strangely unsettling. We imagine answers will bring relief. Sometimes they bring responsibility instead. Once you recognize something clearly, pretending not to see it becomes exhausting. You begin carrying knowledge that quietly asks to be acknowledged, not publicly, not dramatically, simply honestly. Perhaps that's where I find myself now, standing somewhere between observation and acceptance, aware that something has already shifted, even if I haven't yet decided what language deserves to describe it. Maybe not everything important begins with certainty. Maybe some things begin the moment certainty stops being necessary. And perhaps the deepest changes are never announced. Perhaps they simply wait becodantly until the person becoming different finally notices they already have. The strange thing about change is that it rarely introduces itself as change. It disguises itself as routine. One more ordinary morning, one more familiar conversation, one more quiet evening where nothing appears different from the day before. Then, without warning, you catch yourself reacting in a way that belongs to someone you don't entirely recognize. Not because you've become someone else, because a part of you that had always remained dormant has finally decided to participate. I've wondered how much of a person exists long before they ever discover it. Perhaps we're less like unfinished stories and more like libraries with unopened rooms. Entire sections remain locked, not because they're forbidden, but because nothing has ever arrived carrying the right key. Most people spend their lives walking the same hallways, the familiar ones, the predictable ones. They become experts on a small part of themselves and mistake that familiarity for completeness. I used to believe I had done the same. I believed I understood the architecture of my own mind. Every habit had an explanation. Every boundary had a purpose. Every distance served a quiet kind of order. There was comfort in that order, not excitement, not happiness, something steadier. A confidence that tomorrow would resemble today closely enough that nothing unexpected would demand a different version of me. Consistency has its own beauty until it becomes invisible. Only then do you realize how easily stability can transform into repetition. And repetition has an unusual effect. It slowly convinces you that nothing new remains to be discovered. Not in the world, in yourself. That illusion is persuasive. It whispers that you've already reached your limits, that every future thought is merely another variation of something you've already known. Then life interrupts, not dramatically, almost politely, with an experience too precise to dismiss and too subtle to explain. At first, I resisted giving it attention, not because I feared what it might become, because I respected how easily attention can create meaning where none exists. The human mind is talented at connecting unrelated pieces. Bartol's comfort us, sometimes too much. I refused to mistake coincidence for significance. So I waited. Days became weeks. Weeks quietly rearranged themselves into something longer. The more distance I gave it, the clearer it became. That surprised me. Usually, distance fades uncertain things. This did the opposite. It became sharper, like a landscape appearing more defined as morning fog slowly lifted. Nothing new was being added, only hidden details becoming visible. I began asking different questions. Not, why is this happening, but why does it remain consistent? Consistency deserves curiosity. Anything temporary eventually contradicts itself. Anything imagined eventually reveals the effort required to sustain it. Reality behaves differently. Reality continues existing even when no one is watching. Perhaps that's why truth often feels so calm. It doesn't need convincing, it simply remains. I've noticed that the strongest experiences rarely compete for attention. They don't announce their importance. They wait patiently until everything louder grows tired of speaking. Only then do you hear them. There is something deeply humbling about realizing that understanding cannot be rushed. We often chase answers as though speed somehow increases their value. It doesn't. Some answers arrive only after we've become capable of carrying them. Before that moment, they would only become information, not wisdom. I've started wondering whether timing shapes meaning more than meaning shapes timing. Perhaps the same realization delivered a year earlier would have gone unnoticed. Perhaps delivered a year later, it would have arrived too late to change anything at all. Life seems strangely precise that way, invisible intersections, moments that appear ordinary while quietly redirecting everything that follows. We almost never recognize them while they're happening. Recognition belongs to reflection. Only after enough distance exists do we finally see the invisible turning point we unknowingly crossed. I think that's what reflection truly offers, not nostalgia, perspective. It allows separate moments to become part of the same sentence. Events that once felt disconnected suddenly reveal the thread that had been joining them all along. That thread has occupied my thoughts recently. Not because it demands certainty, because it invites honesty. Honesty can be uncomfortable, not because truth hurts, because truth simplifies. It removes the complicated stories we create to avoid admitting what we've quietly understood from the beginning. I've discovered that clarity is surprisingly gentle. It doesn't argue, it doesn't force, it simply waits until resistance becomes more exhausting than acceptance. Then, almost without noticing, you stop defending the old explanation. You let it go, not as a defeat, as an exchange. You trade certainty for something deeper, docucracy. Accuracy feels different. It carries less confidence. More peace. Perhaps that's why I've grown less interested in proving anything. Proof belongs to debate. Understanding belongs to observation. Observation has changed me more than certainty ever could. Watching without rushing to conclude. Listening without preparing a response. Remaining present long enough for deeper patterns to reveal themselves. It's astonishing how much becomes visible once urgency leaves the room. The world begins speaking in quieter languages, not through declarations, through repetition, through rhythm, through the subtle consistency hidden beneath apparent randomness. I've come to trust those rhythms, not because they're predictable, because they're honest. They don't perform, they don't seek approval. They simply continue being exactly what they are. There is freedom in witnessing something that doesn't need to become anything else. Maybe people are the same. Maybe our deepest selves were never meant to be invented, only uncovered, lot after layer, not becoming different, remembering what was already waiting underneath. If that's true, then growth isn't the process of adding more. It's the courage to remove what never truly belonged, the expectations, the performances, the carefully rehearsed versions of ourselves built to survive environments that no longer exist. What remains afterward is usually quieter than we imagined, but infinitely more real. I'm beginning to believe that reality has a remarkable patience. It never competes with illusion. It simply waits. Eventually, illusion exhausts itself. Eventually, performance becomes too heavy to carry. Eventually, every mask asks for rest. When that moment arrives, reality is still there, unchanged, unoffended, ready to be seen exactly as it always was. Perhaps that's where every meaningful journey truly begins. Not at the moment we discover something new, at the moment we stop pretending we haven't already seen it. There comes a quiet moment when you stop searching for explanations and begin paying attention to the space between them. For a long time, I believed understanding was something that could be collected. Read enough books, ask enough questions, live through enough experiences. Eventually, the pieces would fit together into a complete picture. But life doesn't work like a puzzle. It works more like light. The picture was always there. The light simply hadn't reached every corner yet. That realization changed the way I looked at uncertainty. I no longer saw it as an obstacle. I began to see it as an invitation. Not every unanswered question exists because something is missing. Some questions remain unanswered because the person asking them hasn't yet become the version of themselves capable of recognizing the answer. Growth has an unusual rhythm. It never asks for permission. It doesn't arrive according to schedules or expectations. It unfolds beneath ordinary days, hidden beneath routines, so familiar that they appear unchanged. Then one morning, you notice that the thoughts which once consumed you no longer have the same weight, not because they disappeared, because you've become larger than the space they once occupied. Perspective rarely announces itself. It simply replaces panic with patience. I've started noticing how often people confuse movement with progress. They rush from one destination to another, believing speed proves purpose. Yet some of the most meaningful transformations happen while nothing visible seems to be changing at all. A tree doesn't become stronger the day it grows taller. It becomes stronger during the invisible seasons when its roots travel deeper into the earth. No one applauds the roots, no one photographs them. Yet everything standing above the ground depends on what remains unseen. Perhaps people are no different. Maybe the strongest parts of us are the ones no one ever notices. The conversations we have with ourselves after everyone else has gone to sleep, the silent decisions made without witnesses, the promises kept even when breaking them would have gone unnoticed. Character has always fascinated me for that reason, not the version displayed to the world. The version that exists when no audience remains, that's the self that quietly shapes every visible moment. I've spent years believing strength meant carrying everything alone. There was comfort in self-reliance. It created the illusion that nothing outside of me could influence the direction of my life. But influence isn't always something imposed from the outside. Sometimes it arrives through recognition. Sometimes another perspective doesn't replace your own. It sharpens it, like a window being cleaned rather than replaced. The landscape was always there. You simply see it more clearly now. I've become less interested in certainty and more interested in clarity. The difference matters. Certainty often closes doors. Clarity opens windows. One demands final answers. The other remains willing to learn. I think wisdom begins the moment confidence becomes curious. There is something strangely beautiful about changing your mind for the right reasons. Not because you were wrong, because you've become more complete than you were yesterday. Many people fear transformation because they imagine it erases who they used to be. I don't think it does. I think every previous version remains quietly present, like rings hidden inside the trunk of an old tree. They are no longer visible, but they still support everything that came after. I've started carrying more gratitude for the people I once was, even the uncertain one, even the guarded one, even the version that mistook survival for living. Without those chapters, I would never recognize the value of this one. Mirror has become gentler with time. It no longer asks me to relive every mistake. Instead, it reminds me how remarkable it is that growth can emerge from moments that once felt like endings. Perhaps endings have always been misunderstood. Maybe they aren't walls. Maybe they're doorways viewed from the wrong side. I've noticed something else. Peace is quieter than I imagined. When I was younger, I expected peace to feel like the absence of conflict. Now I think it feels more like the absence of resistance. Not resisting reality, not resisting change, not resisting the truth, simply because it arrived differently than expected. Acceptance has become one of the most underestimated forms of courage. Anyone can fight, anyone can deny. It takes a different kind of strength to stand before reality without demanding it become something else. That doesn't mean surrender. It means honesty. Honesty has a remarkable simplicity. It removes unnecessary weight, the stories we invent to protect ourselves, the identities we maintain out of habit, the expectations inherited hopes through our fears, through every invisible lesson that quietly shaped us before this exact second arrived. And yet, beneath all those differences, I believe something remains constant, a quiet desire to be genuine, to live without constantly performing, to breathe without pretending, to become familiar with the person waiting beneath every expectation. Perhaps that journey never truly ends. Perhaps each season removes another layer, another certainty, another fear mistaken for identity, until one day, without realizing, when it happened, you discover that you are no longer trying to become yourself. You simply are, not because you've reached perfection, because you've stopped negotiating with authenticity. There is extraordinary freedom in that, not the freedom to escape life, the freedom to meet it, honestly, to welcome both clarity and mystery, to appreciate questions that remain unanswered, to understand that not every horizon is meant to be reached. Some exist simply to keep us walking, and maybe that's enough. Maybe a meaningful life isn't measured by how so many answers we collect, but by how fully we allow ourselves to remain present while discovering them. If that's true, then every quiet moment matters, every unnoticed decision matters, every act of integrity, every patient conversation, every ordinary day lived with intention becomes part of something much larger than itself. A life isn't built in extraordinary moments alone. It's built in thousands of invisible choices that slowly shape the person capable of recognizing extraordinary moments when they finally arrive. Perhaps that's the quiet miracle I've been searching for all along. Not a dramatic revelation, not a perfect conclusion, just the steady realization that becoming isn't about chasing a distant version of yourself. It's about walking honestly toward the light that has been waiting for you since the very beginning, one quiet step at a time. Eventually, every journey arrives at a place where the next step cannot be found by looking farther ahead. It can only be found by looking more honestly within. For a long time, I believed clarity was something waiting somewhere in the distance, a destination hidden beyond enough experience, enough mistakes, enough victories, enough years. Now I understand that clarity rarely waits at the end of the road. It appears in the middle of it. Often, while nothing remarkable seems to be happening, I've learned that the quietest moments often carry the greatest transformations. Not because they demand attention, because they don't, they ask for something far more difficult. Presence, real presence. The kind that isn't distracted by yesterday or negotiating with tomorrow. The kind that notices the sound of rain without wishing for sunshine. The kind that listens without planning a reply. The kind that accepts a moment before deciding whether it should have been different. Presence changes the texture of life. The ordinary becomes astonishing. A familiar street suddenly feels unfamiliar because you finally notice the light reflecting across its windows. A conversation you've had 100 times reveals a meaning that somehow escaped you until now. Even silence begins speaking a language you never realized you understood. Perhaps life has always been speaking. Perhaps we've simply been too busy rehearsing our own thoughts to hear it. There is a strange freedom in no longer needing every chapter to justify itself. Some seasons exist to build, others exist to strip away. Some introduce people who stay for decades. Others introduce people who remain only long enough to leave behind a lesson that quietly continues long after their footsteps disappear. None of those moments are wasted. Even disappointment carries instruction. Even uncertainty shapes direction. Even endings become foundations for beginnings we could never have imagined while standing inside them. Looking back, I realized that I spent years measuring progress by visible change, new places, new achievements, new goals, but the deepest progress rarely announces itself in public. It happens in invisible decisions. The day you forgive without needing an apology, the day you choose honesty over comfort, the day you stop competing with someone else's timeline. the day you finally recognize that becoming yourself is not a race against anyone else. Those moments rarely receive applause, yet they alter the course of a life. I've also discovered that strength isn't as rigid as I once believed. It bends, it listens, it adapts without abandoning its principles. Water taught me that. It never argues with the shape of the land. It simply continues moving until mountains become valleys and stone slowly remembers that even the hardest surfaces can change. Patience possesses a quiet power, not the patience of waiting passively, the patience of continuing faithfully, continuing to learn, continuing to hope, continuing to act with integrity, even when immediate results remain invisible. Roots don't stop growing because no one can see them. Neither should we. There comes a point when comparison loses its voice, not because everyone suddenly becomes equal, because you finally understand that every path asks different questions. You cannot judge a seed for not becoming a river. You cannot expect the ocean to bloom like a forest. Everything fulfills its purpose differently. Perhaps people do as well. The older I become, the less interested I am in appearing complete. Completion suggests there is nothing left to discover. I'd rather remain open, still curious, still capable of being surprised by the world, still willing to admit that certainty is often smaller than wonder. Wonder keeps the heart awake. It reminds us that mystery isn't the enemy of understanding. Sometimes mystery is understanding in its earliest form, a truth that has not yet found its final language, and maybe it never will. Not every meaningful experience fits inside perfect sentences. Some are meant to be carried rather than explained. Like the feeling of standing beneath an endless sky, like the comfort of hearing a familiar laugh after a difficult season, like realizing that somewhere along the way, the person you were searching for quietly became the person you were becoming. That realization changes everything because the search ends not in triumph, in peace. You stop chasing a future version of yourself worthy of acceptance. You begin accepting the person taking the next honest step today. That single shift transforms ambition into purpose, purpose into gratitude, gratitude into a life that no longer depends on extraordinary moments to feel meaningful. I've come to believe that fulfillment isn't hidden inside perfection. It's hidden inside alignment. When your choices reflect your values, when your words reflect your thoughts, when your actions reflect your promises, when your private character and public image no longer need separate identities, that kind of alignment creates a quiet confidence, not loud enough to demand attention, strong enough that it no longer needs it. Perhaps that is what maturity truly offers. Not all the answers, better questions, questions that make room for compassion, questions that replace judgment with curiosity, questions that invite understanding before conclusion. The world already contains enough noise, enough certainty, shouted across rooms where no one is listening. Maybe what it needs more of are people willing to pause before speaking, people willing to understand before deciding, people willing to remain human in a time that often rewards performance over authenticity. If there is one lesson I hope never to forget, it is this. The life that changes you most will probably not announce itself. It will arrive disguised as an ordinary day, an unexpected conversation, a difficult decision, a quiet sunrise, a single moment where you choose courage over habit. And years later, when someone asks where everything changed, you won't remember the exact hour. You'll simply smile, because you'll know that transformation rarely begins with fireworks. It begins with awareness, then honesty, then one deliberate step followed by another and another, until the distance between who you were and who you have become can no longer be measured by time alone, only by the depth of your understanding. That is the journey worth taking, not because it guarantees certainty, but because it teaches you how to walk with integrity, even when certainty never arrives. And perhaps that has been the destination all along. Not the end of the road, but the quiet confidence to continue walking it with open eyes, an open mind, and a heart that no longer fears becoming someone wiser than it was yesterday. Because in the end, a meaningful life is not built by collecting perfect moments. It is built by meeting imperfect moments with unwavering honesty. Everything else is only scenery. The journey itself has always been the real story.